Good evening, universe. Tonight I'm going to be going over all of the books I read in both March and April. I haven't really been wanting to do combined wrap-ups for a while because I've been reading a little bit more, but it works out because I only read 2 books in April, and also when I was doing the recording for the March video, my recording crashed and deleted all of my footage. So we're going to be doing it all together. I think I figured out the problem, so hopefully that won't be an issue this time. The first book I read in March was Where the Drowned Girls Go by Seanan McGuire, and it was great. I really enjoyed expanding on the lore of the Wayward Children saga. Basically, what this book is about is it focuses on the character Cora, who has been introduced in other books. Without giving too much away of previous ones, essentially she was altered by a previous encounter in one of the books, and it is in a way that is terrifying to her. So in order to push back against that, she thinks the best thing that she can do is just leave behind her world and the other worlds. She thinks that what she needs to do is go to I think it's called the Whitethorn Academy, the other school that takes in the kids that have returned from their doors. And so this school has kind of the opposite strategy than the Home for Wayward Children, which is to say that they don't embrace the world that the person comes from. They really embrace here, now, leave your past behind, and then they make you do like the opposite of whatever sympathies caused you to go to your door in the first place. So for example, if you went to a nonsense world, they make you be extremely practical, extremely logical, follow rules perfectly, whereas if you went to a logic world or reason world, they make you be ridiculous, flout the rules, have something absurd for breakfast, so on. And so this book follows Cora as she goes there and deals with just an entirely different school. And I like the characters introduced in this one. I am interested to know more about the person that runs the Whitethorn Academy. Most of all, I'm just kind of bummed that I'm finally caught up with the series, because that means that I have to wait until I think January to get a new installment. I've really been enjoying the Wayward Children series so far. They're so nice as just like a micro story in between bigger books. This was one of my higher rated ones in the Wayward Children saga. Next up, I read One of Us is Lying by Karen McManus, and I read this mostly because I wanted kind of a change of pace. I wanted to reach out from my usual fantasy dwelling, and so I picked up something that is a modern mystery. Essentially, what happens is 5 kids go into detention. They're all in high school, and they're all from very different, walks of school. They have different, cliques. One of the kids who ran a rumor blog, basically like Perez Hilton, but for school, and he's always right. Everything he posts is primo accurate. That kid, knockoff Perez Hilton, dies in detention. He has what appears to be an allergic reaction to peanuts and is unable to be saved because they try to find the EpiPens, but weirdly there's none on him. There's none in the nurse's office. The cabinet's been all cleaned out. And so a mystery ensues because the cops think maybe somebody set him up to die this way. So we follow the 4 other kids in their day-to-day life throughout the rest of the case as they are exploring who might be responsible for that. And obviously the cops think it's one of the 4 that was in the room with him, especially because the post that he was going to release that day, they find out, had a damning secret for, each of the other 4. So they are considered the prime suspects, and we follow them and try and figure out from their perspective who is the real killer. I thought it was great. There was a lot of tension. There was a lot of interesting character growth. I loved especially a lot of the relationships that the kids have with their parents or their other family members. There was one in particular that hit really close to home. The mom character of one of our leads, just familiar ground. I really enjoyed it overall. I felt all the characters were real and believable, and And I thought that was great because they all start out as basically like cliches or like tropes. So there's like the nerd girl, there's this beauty, there's a jock, and there's a bad boy. You really get their backgrounds and they become super fleshed out characters. And I really liked it. And the resolution of the mystery was satisfying. It all made sense. So I'll definitely be checking out other books by this author. I think she has another one called One of Us is Next, and maybe one other mystery. Overall, I liked this a lot better than In a Dark, Dark Wood. I don't know if it's just because I tend to enjoy YA a little bit more, so the fact that this was a YA mystery might have appealed to me, but overall, I really liked it. Next, I read The Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson. This is book 2 in the First Era Mistborn trilogy, and it is my second book by Brandon Sanderson. I've been wanting to read more of the high fantasy, less of the young adult fantasy, although I definitely see the crossover potential in this series, but I've been wanting to branch out into more fantastic stuff, essentially. It's been a while since I read Mistborn, but I was itching to get back into it, especially with that Kickstarter that Brandon Sanderson did, and I really enjoyed The Well of Ascension. I enjoyed it more, I think, than the first Mistborn book, which I really would prefer if they had just left it called The Final Empire. It's annoying to me when I understand why, but I don't like it when they're like, this is, for example, there's like the Conqueror saga, but everyone calls it the And I Darken trilogy. I just wish the name would be different. Anyway, I liked The Well of Ascension. It is definitely a large book, but it is definitely fast-paced. I loved the further exploration of Vin and her kind of struggle with femininity and figuring out who she is after the events of the first book. One of my favorite lines is just this little throwaway line where she's like, "My love interest deserves a normal woman," where she's trying not to be paranoid and weird. And I thought that was hilarious and relatable. Overall, I loved The Well of Ascension. The twists and turns and lore, all of it was fantastic. And I was super excited to continue to the third book. But I did want to take a couple of breaks just because that's a lot to read all at once. So next up, I read Malice by Heather Walter. This is a sapphic retelling of Sleeping Beauty, which follows essentially what would be the Maleficent character in the Disney canon. She's called Maleficent. In this book, her name is Alice, spelled with a Y. One of the things that happens is people sometimes call her Malice because of magical racism. So essentially, this takes place in a world where there are Fae, and the Fae have gifted to the humans the graces, is what they're called. They basically have a little bit of Fae blood, and this blood allows them to use magic. They use their blood in elixirs, and the elixirs do particular things. Depending on what specialty of grace you are, that's the type of thing that you can do. So there's like a beauty grace who can enhance the lustrousness of your hair or something like that. And then there's like a wisdom grace who will help you ace a test, that sort of thing. But then there's Alice, our main character, and she is considered the dark grace because she comes from a race called the Vila, which is basically just like the evil fairies, the evil ugly hag fairies. The way that they know that she's different, that she's half Vila, is because instead of gold like the Grace's blood, her blood is like this frothy green color. So she has like this undercurrent of green. So there are a lot of laws which kind of dictate what things Graces are allowed to do. And since they say that she's a Grace, even though she's like kind of different than the other ones, she is also bound by these laws. So one of the laws is that Graces are not allowed to hurt people, which is kind of unfortunate because Alice's magical specialty, while the other Graces give you like buffs, they give you bonuses, cool, good things, Alice gives you basically distilled curses. So if you want your like romantic rival to suddenly break out in a bunch of hideous warts, you go to Alice. But since she's not allowed to harm people, everybody has to come in and be like, oh, I am going to use this because I like to have warts. I'm definitely not going to use it on somebody who doesn't want warts, because I would never use a grace elixir to harm somebody else. Alice knows it's a lie. The person knows she knows it's a lie, but they said the thing, and that means she is free to give them whatever. And so she's allowed to practice this way under the rule of the king and the queen. Technically, the queen is the one who holds power. It runs through her line, and then the king just happens to be the the person that she's married to. But over time, there has been like a slow transfer of power so that the kingdom becomes a little bit more kingly based. So basically, this story follows Alice as she discovers more secrets about her power, more secrets about where the Graces come from, where the Vila, her people, come from, how she exists, so on, so forth. She also meets the daughter of the king, Aurora, who is very beautiful and bold and loves to read. And Alice is immediately, I mean, this is a sapphic story. You know where this is going. But I really loved it. I thought it was fantastic. It was basically everything that I wanted from it. I thought the amount of darkness that was brought into the fairy tale was good. I didn't feel like it was overly trying too hard to be like, I'm edgy. So I really enjoyed that. It felt natural. I also really enjoyed the romance. I thought it was cute and sweet and believable. Next up, I read volumes 4 and 5 from Witch Hat Atelier. I am not really going to go into too much about what it's about at this point because I've talked about the manga before, and obviously I don't want to give stuff away. Essentially, this is just about a little girl who is learning to become a witch. We learn along with her all the witch lore and stuff like that. These volumes did introduce some secret backstories, which I thought was fantastic, as well as bringing in a couple more of the more dangerous elements of the world and just a little bit of dark complications. I'm still really enjoying it and all the depth of the characters. Nothing but praise for this manga series. Definitely highly recommend. So those were actually the last things that I finished for, what month am I talking about? March. But I was also working on another book, which was The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. I did DNF it, and oh boy, I wanted to like this book a lot. I gave it several chances. I went through like this weird cycle where in the first like 60 pages I was like, I'm gonna DNF this, I'm not into it. But then it like caught my attention, and so I kept going because I was basically, my idea was I'll wait until I get to page 100. That's, a fifth of the way through. I've given it a fair shake by that point, and by the time I got to page 100, I was drawn in. However, by the time I got to page like 350, something like that, I was like propelled back out. And this happened for a couple of reasons. One, comma splices. I just didn't like it. Didn't like the writing style. That threw me off a lot at first. It was part of the reason why I was like, I don't know about this. But then I kept reading and I was like, you know what? I can overlook this. I feel like I've talked about this before. Oh, I talked about it in my unhaul. So you guys know all of this. I was annoyed by Marco. Didn't like the comma splices. I didn't like the Night Circus. So yeah, March was when I DNF'd it. And that brings us to April, when I read only 2 books. I finished 2 trilogies in April. So I started with the Excalibur Curse. My impatient waiting for the library to send it to me finally came through. I was so excited. I really enjoyed it. As usual with the rest of this series, I feel that it feels very enchanted. We get the final reveal of Guinevere's past in this book, and I really liked it. I did predict some aspects of it, but that didn't spoil it for me at all. I liked the way that her romantic relationships were, like her possibilities were resolved. I do wish we had been given a little bit more romance in this book, but I do think that it was intentionally more focused on Guinevere as a person in her journey. Overall, I loved it. Oh, sorry, excuse me. I loved the messages. I loved all the characters, and the big bad. The final showdown with the big bad I thought was fantastic. Love this series. I'll definitely be reading it again. And then the second trilogy that I finished was the Mistborn trilogy. So I read The Hero of Ages, and boy was this a chunky one. It basically took me like the whole month to read. It took me like 3 weeks to read this. It was great. I found the ending to be extremely unexpected, but I really enjoyed it. This one, again, I don't want to give too much away, but following an event that occurs in the second book, we follow our characters in the wake of that. There's a time skip in between each of the books. So once again, there's been a time skip, and we have a very different kind of world from the one that we left. And so basically we explore the lore behind what happened in book 2, which is why the universe has has been set up the way that it was at the beginning of book 1. So we get a lot of really deep lore. I thought it was really interesting. Once again, I thought the big bad was great. It definitely felt like an appropriately massive challenge to try and face this. And I think as a reader, we are once again put into the way that book 1 made us feel. So book 1, the main characters endeavor to complete an impossible task. And book 3 has basically that same idea. They have to complete an impossible task. I really liked that kind of cycle. I loved Sazed's arc in particular, but I loved all the rest of the characters as well. It felt like they reached satisfying conclusions, and while from the beginning I felt like a good number of the characters felt a little bit more like cardboard cutout-y tropes, I felt like most of them came to a really satisfying and lively, lifelike fruition. I got them. I understood them. I believed in them. And so overall, I loved it. I want to do a overall view of review deep dive into the series so I can talk more freely about spoilers. I did have plenty of complaints. One of them was the prose. I understand that this is the first series that Brandon Sanderson wrote, and it feels that way. It feels a little bit choppy and inelegant at a lot of points. And there are a lot of fight scenes, especially in book 3, which was not necessarily my favorite part of the series, but I still enjoyed it overall. It's just a little bit hard for me, at least, to 100% wrap my mind around the battle choreography. So that was a little bit but I really loved the series. I'm gonna be reading it again for sure, just not immediately. And I will be continuing from here on my Brandon Sanderson quest. I plan to, at the very least, get through the entire Cosmere. Probably my next book that I'll be reading by Brandon Sanderson will be Warbreaker, because that sounds really interesting. I'm probably going to do Elantris after that, because I kind of want to hit those standalones before I dive into another series. So after I do those two, I'll probably start reading Stormlight Archives. And I'm excited for that. So overall, these 2 months were pretty good. Aside from my complaints about the Night Circus, I really enjoyed pretty much everything else that I read. They were all very distinct, and I read, for me, quite a lot in March. Really happy with these reading months. Thank you for listening, and have a beautiful night, universe.